I stood there, the paper clutched tightly in my hand, as my grandson's words echoed in my ears. Grandma, Mom says you're just waiting to die. The sting of his laughter still fresh. I walked into the bank the next morning, hoping to sort the mess quietly, but when I saw the beneficiary on the document, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The morning began like most others in the Harper household, with the soft hum of the dishwasher cycling in the background and the gentle sizzle of scrambled eggs cooking in the skillet. Evelyn Harper stood at the stove, her posture upright, her pale blue cardigan buttoned neatly over a pressed blouse. The sun pushed gently through the kitchen blind, casting warm stripes across the countertops and floor, but there was little warmth in the room itself. Josh sat at the table, slouched in his chair with his elbows spread wide, thumbing through his phone between quick glances at the food. He was 17 now, tall, lanky, and restless, with a growing edge to his tone that Evelyn had noticed but rarely challenged. Linda, her daughter-in-law, was seated across from, sipping black coffee as she flipped through the local newspaper, not really reading, just turning pages. Evelyn set a plate in front of her grandson, smiling gently. Eat before it gets cold, sweetheart. I added cheddar just how you like it. Josh picked up his fork without looking at. Thanks, he muttered. Then, with the timing and delivery of a punchline, he said, Grandma, Mom says you're just waiting to die. The air seemed to stop moving. Evelyn froze, one hand still on the back of his chair, the other hovering near her own plate. For a second she thought she might have misheard him, but the way he smirked, half amused, half proud, confirmed. She looked toward Linda, expecting a reaction, some kind of correction, but Linda simply turned another page of the newspaper, unaffected. Josh gave a shrug and added, She was joking, I guess. David entered just then, tightening his tie with one hand and chewing the last bite of a granola bar with the other. His eyes passed over his mother, then to Josh. That's not something you joke about, son, he said, not unkindly, but without much force behind it. Linda didn't look up. Honestly, Evelyn, I'm sorry if you took it the wrong way. I was being sarcastic. It wasn't meant to hurt anyone. Evelyn didn't reply. Her lips pressed into a line, and she reached for her coffee mug with hands that had begun to tremble ever so slightly. She lifted the cup slowly, praying the shaking wouldn't betray her. The spoon inside clinked softly against the porcelain, and for a moment, the only sound in the kitchen was that faint, rattling. I think I'll eat a little later, she said quietly. I'm not quite hungry. She pushed her chair back with grace, stood, and walked out of the kitchen with the kind of composure that made it difficult to tell whether she was angry, hurt, or simply her steps were slow but firm, and she didn't touch the wall for balance, though her knees stiffened with every stride. Behind her, the conversation drifted to weekend errand and school schedule, as if nothing sharp had just been said at all. Later that morning, Evelyn sat in her sunroom, the only space in the house that still felt entirely like her own. The cushions were floral, soft from years of use, and the air smelled faintly of lavender from a small oil diffuser that she kept by the windowsill. A half-finished crossword sat beside her tea, but her pen hadn't moved in over 20 minutes. When the doorbell rang, Evelyn rose and walked slowly to answer. Martha Klein, her closest friend for over 30 years, stepped inside with her usual briskness. I brought those lemon scones you like, she said, holding up a small bakery bag. And I don't want to hear that you're not eating. They sat together in the sunroom, sipping tea. After a few minutes of small talk, Martha tilted her head, examining Evelyn closely. You look off, she said, like you've been holding your breath. Evelyn hesitated for a long moment, then finally spoke. This morning, at breakfast, Josh repeated something Linda told him, word for word. She said, I'm just waiting to die. Martha stiffened, the warmth in her face cooling to something more alert. She actually said that? To your grandson? Evelyn nodded once, and David said it wasn't funny, but then he just kept buttering his toast like it was a minor hiccup in conversation. Martha leaned forward, her voice low and certain. You don't have to live like that, Ev. You know that, right? Evelyn looked down at her. The tremor had passed, but she could still feel the echo of it beneath her skin. Then she lifted her chin slowly. I've decided, she said, her voice calm but unyielding. I'm not going to sit here and wait for them to chip away at what I've built. I won't wait. I'll write my own ending. Martha looked at her, startled. What kind of ending? But Evelyn didn't answer directly. She rose and walked into her study. the hardwood floor creaking faintly. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a thick navy blue folder, one she hadn't touched in months, but had never forgotten. Inside were her financial documents, insurance policy, copies of wills, lists of contacts, everything organized, color-coded, labeled. She ran her fingers across the cover, feeling the weight of it, the clarity that came with knowing she still had agency. From the hallway, Martha called out softly, "Ev, are you sure you're okay?" Evelyn returned to the doorway with the folder in, her spine straight and her expression unreadable. "I'm more than okay," she said. "I'm clear." The marble floors of the bank lobby gleamed under the soft white lighting, a silent testament to order and wealth. It was just after 10 a.m., mid-morning quiet, between the rush of working professionals and the trickle of retirees. Evelyn Harper stood just inside the entrance, her folder clutched tightly under one arm, her handbag over the other. She paused to steady her breath. Outside, the wind had picked up, tugging at her coat as she walked from the car. Now, inside, everything was still, and cold. The kind of cold that came from polished glass and institutional air conditioning. Her eyes moved across the lobby as she spotted him. Mark Ellis was standing just outside his glass-walled office, speaking to a teller. He noticed her immediately, and his posture shifted, not startled, but alert, as if he instinctively recognized that this was not a casual visit. "Mrs. Harper," he said warmly, stepping forward and extending a hand. "It's been a while." "It has," Evelyn replied, her voice soft but measured. "Do you have time for me?" "For you?" "Of course." He gestured toward his office. "Come on in." She followed him, her heels quiet against the stone floor. Once seated, Evelyn laid the navy blue folder on the desk between them with a kind of reverence, as if placing something sacred on an altar. Mark waited, polite and silent, as she opened it and began sorting through the content. "I need to make some changes," she said finally, "to the beneficiary, and possibly the structure of the accounts." He gave a slow, professional, "Of course. Let's start by reviewing what you currently have in place." As they moved through the documents, checking balances, certificate, life insurance beneficiary, Evelyn's mind stayed sharp. She followed each number, clarified each clause. There was no tremor in her fingers now, only a calm resolve. Mark, in turn, remained careful and clear, never assuming, never rushing. When they reached the primary checking and savings, Evelyn paused. "I want to take my daughter-in-law off everything," she said plainly. Mark glanced up, only briefly. "Understood." "I'd like to name David as trustee," she continued, "for now. But the accounts and policy, they need to go into a trust. I want it notarized and filed properly. I don't want it challenged later by someone loud." There was a flicker of something in Mark's expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. He leaned back slightly in his chair. "That's very doable. We'll prepare a revocable living trust that names you as the grantor and David as trustee. It'll give him management authority only if something happens, illness, incapacity. Until then, everything remains under your control." "Good, Evelyn. I want it done today." Mark hesitated for a half-second, then nodded again. "I can have the paperwork ready in 45 minutes. We'll get it notarized before you leave." She reached into her handbag and retrieved a pen, clicking it with finality. "Then let's begin." By the time the documents were ready, a notary had joined them in the office. Evelyn signed each page slowly, deliberately, as Mark guided her through the clauses. Her signature was steady, her gaze unwavering. Mark double-checked each signature, initial, and page number before sliding a final copy across the desk toward her. "These are yours," he said. "The originals stay here. Everything will be recorded before the end of day." Evelyn placed the folder carefully into her purse, fastening the zipper with a sense of closure she hadn't expected to feel. Not satisfaction, not yet, but something close to clarity. As she rose to leave, Mark stood as well. "If you need anything else, anytime, you call me directly. No intermediaries." She met his eyes, and for the first time that morning allowed a faint smile. "Thank you, Mark. I appreciate your discretion." "Of course." The afternoon light filtered through the kitchen window, casting a golden sheen across the countertop and catching the small motes of dust drifting in the air. Evelyn stood at the sink, rinsing out her teacup with slow, deliberate motion. The folder was no longer in her purse. It was tucked somewhere far more private now, but the sense of weight it had carried still lingered in her chest. She had just dried her hands and turned toward the hallway when Linda appeared in the kitchen doorway. arms folded, jaw set in that familiar way Evelyn come to read, like a storm warning. You went to the bank today, Linda said without preamble. Evelyn blinked. I did? I saw the alert come through. Linda continued, stepping in further, her voice low but firm. I'm still connected to the main family account, remember? At least, for now. Evelyn smiled politely, as though hearing a child announce they'd discovered where the cookies were hidden. Oh, I suppose I stopped in. Routine business? Nothing urgent. Linda narrowed her eyes. Routine, huh? You were gone nearly 2 hours. That's not routine. Did you move something? Change something? Evelyn tilted her head slightly. It's not unusual to review one's finances from time to time, especially at my age. Cut the act, Linda snapped, stepping closer. If you're thinking of doing something petty out of spite, just know it won't hold up legally. You've made plenty of impulsive decisions lately. I made lemon bars last week, Evelyn replied mildly. That felt impulsive at the time. The quiet click of sneakers on tile interrupted them. Josh had walked in unnoticed, earbuds looped around his neck, phone still in hand. He looked from his mother to his grandmother, sensing something charged. Then, like a spark thrown casually onto gasoline, he added with a crooked grin, maybe she's just waiting to die again. The silence that followed was immediate and chilling. Linda didn't correct him. She didn't flinch. Evelyn didn't either. Instead, she gave a soft, dry chuckle. You're quite good at repeating what you're told, Josh. You'll make a fine attorney someday, though I suggest you learn to distinguish between sarcasm and cruelty before law school. Josh blinked, caught off guard by her poise. Then he looked down at his phone again, suddenly I'm going to my room, he mumbled, and disappeared down the hall. Evelyn turned back to the sink and picked up her tea towel, drying the rim of the cup one more. Linda watched her, eyes narrowing further, waiting for something to crack. But Evelyn only said, if you're concerned about account access, I'd suggest contacting the bank directly. I'm sure they'll walk you through what you're entitled to. Linda didn't reply. She stared for another beat, then walked out without a word, her footsteps sharp on the floorboard. That night, in the quiet of her bedroom, Evelyn sat at her writing desk. The lamp cast a warm circle of light across her open journal. Her pen moved with quiet precision as she recorded the day's events, not with emotion, but with the steadiness of someone chronicling evidence. She confronted me, accused, without proof. Josh repeated her again. Same phrase, same venom. Not malicious yet, but learned through her. She paused, then underlined the last sentence twice. Closing the journal gently, she picked up the phone and dialed. Martha answered on the second ring. Are you all right? Her friend asked, immediately sensing that Evelyn's voice was, she suspects something, but she won't see the paper I signed. There was a moment of silence, then Martha said, good. Turn their words into proof. That's how you win. I'm working on it, Evelyn replied. She hung up, stood slowly, and crossed to the walk-in closet in the corner of the room. On the highest shelf, behind a faded hatbox and a stack of old birthday cards, sat a small steel lockbox. She pulled it down with both hands and brought it to the dresser. From her handbag, she retrieved the trust document, sliding them carefully inside. Next went the notary certification, the revised beneficiary statement, and a handwritten list of next steps. She locked the box with a small silver key, then placed it back on the shelf. Out of reach, but never out of. The law office sat inside a converted brick building just off Milwaukee, nestled between a florist and a coffee shop with overpriced croissants. From the outside, it looked quaint, almost cozy, but Evelyn knew better. Quiet buildings, like quiet people, often held the sharpest weapon. The receptionist greeted her by name and offered her water while she waited. Evelyn declined. She sat in the leather chair by the window, folder resting on her lap, watching the clouds roll across a pale gray sky. She had been prepared for anger, for confrontation. What she hadn't expected, what still stunned her into silence when she thought about it, was how quickly Linda had escalated. A guardianship petition filed 2 days ago, claiming cognitive decline, financial mismanagement, isolation. The language had been sterile, almost polite, but Evelyn had read between every line. The implication was clear. Evelyn can't be trusted with her own life anymore. The door to the back offices opened. A tall woman in a charcoal pantsuit stepped out, glasses perched low on the bridge of her. Mrs. Harper? I'm Sandra Blake. Please, come in. Evelyn stood, her bones protesting a little, and followed her down the hall to an office lined with law books, diplomas, and a framed photo of Lake Michigan at sunset. The walls smelled faintly of printer toner and lavender hand sand. Sandra gestured toward the chair across from her desk. I've read the petition. It's flimsy, but that doesn't mean it's harmless. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. I figured as much. Sandra sat, flipping through a slim file. Your daughter-in-law is claiming early onset forgetfulness, says you've lost track of payments, overdrafted it, gave confusing instructions at the bank. Classic groundwork for a guardianship maneuver. Make you sound just functional enough to worry everyone, but not strong enough to resist. I haven't overdrafted a single account since 1992, Evelyn replied flatly. And even then, it was a bookkeeping error. My bookkeeping. Sandra smiled faintly, then tapped the top page of the petition. Linda's a dangerous kind of confident. She's not just grasping, she believes she can win. She's used to people folding around her, Evelyn said. I won't be one of them. Sandra leaned back. Good. Because now we fight her with paper, not punches. She opened a drawer and pulled out a form. I'm ordering a formal medical evaluation, cognitive testing, mental capacity review, a full record to establish decisiveness and awareness. You pass, which I expect you will, and we attach the results to our response. Court's less likely to entertain a petition like this once they see it's built on sand. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Will the results be sealed? Not automatically, but we'll file a request. You have a right to privacy. We only use the report if she pushes. There was something oddly reassuring in Sandra's not motherly, not coddling. It was the voice of someone who had sat across from frightened clients and had learned that strength wasn't always I'm not frightened, Evelyn said aloud, surprising even herself. I know, Sandra said. That's why you came here before the hearing date. Most people wait too long. Evelyn glanced down at the folder in her lap. She's underestimated me. Sandra tapped her pen against the desk. Good. That's the best position to start from. 2 days later, Evelyn sat across from a white-haired psychologist in a soft-lit office filled with plants and clocks. The question came quickly. Word recall, logic, personal timelines, and she answered each one with precise clarity. Yes, she knew the present. No, she didn't need help managing her bills. Yes, she remembered what she ate for breakfast yesterday. She even remembered the brand of marmalade she'd opened last Tuesday, and where she'd bought it. The doctor smiled, more than once. The results came back within 48 hours. No signs of cognitive impairment. Full executive function, capable of managing personal and financial affairs independently. The report was sealed, stamped, and sent directly to Sandra's office. Evelyn stood in her hallway that afternoon, holding the envelope unopened. She didn't need to read. She had lived it. She slid it into the lockbox alongside the trust paper, each document resting like a shield across her future. The wood-paneled courtroom smelled faintly of lemon polish and something older, paper, or time. Evelyn Harper sat near the front, her hands resting gently on the arms of her chair, a silk scarf draped loosely around her neck. Her posture was perfect, not stiff, but deliberate, measured, ready. Across the aisle, Linda sat beside her blazer a shade too bold for the setting, crimson red, with sharp lapels and an expression to match. She didn't look nervous, she looked expectant. David sat behind her, back slightly hunched, fingers twisted together in his lap. He hadn't said much since they arrived. Josh wasn't there. Sandra Blake entered just before the judge, carrying a slim leather portfolio and walking with the quiet precision of someone used to playing long games and winning them. She offered Evelyn a quick nod before settling beside her. All set? She asked softly. Evelyn nodded once. Let's begin. The bailiff called court to order. Then Judge Rhonda Simmons stepped out from chambers and took her seat on the bench. She was a tall woman in her early 60s with iron gray hair pulled into a smooth twist, wire-rimmed glasses, and a gaze that moved like a searchlight. Let's proceed with the hearing on petition for guardianship of Mrs. Evelyn Harper, she said, voice clear and even. Filed by Ms. Linda Harper, daughter-in-law of the respondent. Ms. Harper, you may begin. Linda's attorney stood, a man Evelyn had never met before, young, eager, and just slightly overconfident. Your Honor, we submit that Mrs. Harper has exhibited patterns of cognitive decline that place her financial and personal affairs at risk. She has shown confusion regarding her bank account, difficulty remembering important appointments, and has expressed paranoid concerns about family members. Behavior consistent with early-stage dementia. We are requesting temporary guardianship to ensure her well-being and preserve the family's financial stability. Judge Simmons turned her gaze toward Evelyn. Mrs. Harper, Do you understand the petition being brought against you? Evelyn's voice was firm. I do, Your Honor, and I oppose it entirely. Sandra stood. Your Honor, we'd like to enter into evidence a full medical capacity evaluation conducted last week by a licensed clinical psychologist with 25 years of practice. It confirms that Mrs. Harper is fully competent, cognitively and emotionally, to manage her personal and financial affairs. We also request that the report remain sealed unless the court deems otherwise. She handed the folder to the clerk, who brought it to the bench. Judge Simmons flipped it open, scanned the top page, then flipped to the signature and seal at the end. Her face gave away nothing, but she nodded once. Report entered, sealed unless challenged. What else, Ms. Blake? Sandra stepped forward. We'd also like to call Mark Ellis, senior bank manager at Central Trust Milwaukee. Linda's head snapped sideways, eyes narrowing. Mark walked in from the back of the courtroom, composed in a navy suit and striped tie. He took the stand, swore the oath, and sat. Mr. Ellis, Sandra began, did Mrs. Harper meet with you in person on September 4th? She did. Can you describe the purpose of her visit? She came to review her accounts and initiate the creation of a revocable trust. Did she appear confused or incapable of understanding the process? Not at all. In fact, she asked clear, specific questions and reviewed every page thoroughly before signing. And who is named as trustee in the document? Her son, David Harper. Sandra turned slightly. And is Linda Harper included anywhere in the trust? No, she is not. A soft exhale escaped from David's lips behind. Sandra turned back to the bench. Your Honor, we submit that not only is this petition without merit, but that Mrs. Harper has taken proactive, legally sound steps to protect her asset in accordance with Wisconsin state law. Linda leaned in toward her attorney, whispering fast, frantic words. Her face was blanching by degrees. Judge Simmons closed the folder and set it aside with a deliberate hand. I've reviewed the petition, the supporting evidence, and the test. Based on the cognitive evaluation and the bank manager, I find that Mrs. Harper is competent and fully capable of managing her affairs. The guardianship petition is hereby denied. Linda flinched. But there's one more matter, Judge Simmons. Mrs. Harper's legal team has submitted trust document to the court for record, which I will accept as valid. This includes beneficiary structure and trustee designation. She turned to Linda. You are not a party to the trust. You hold no legal authority over Mrs. Harper's finances or estate. For the first time since entering the courtroom, Linda looked uncertain. Her mouth parted as if to argue, but no sound came. The fluorescent lights in Sandra Blake's office buzzed faintly overhead as Evelyn sat across from her, a thick black binder resting. Outside, Milwaukee's late afternoon sun glanced off car windows in the parking lot, but inside, the temperature had dropped. Not physically, emotionally. There was no need to rush now. The wheels were turning on their own. Is this everything? Sandra asked, tapping a fingernail against the binder's plastic. Evelyn nodded. Every account she ever had joint access. I started tracking withdrawals the moment I noticed the balances slipping. Sandra flipped the binder open. Receipts, timestamp, memo line. I color-coded the suspicious ones. Evelyn asked. Red means recurring transfers to accounts I've never seen. Blue is spending that doesn't match my activity. You'll find a lot of Amazon and boutique purchases under Linda's name. Sandra's brow lifted slightly, almost impressed. You've done my job for me. I was a principal for 31 years. You get good at pattern recognition. Just then, the door clicked open and a woman in a gray suit entered carrying a laptop and a thick folder of her own. She had the air of someone who knew numbers better than names. Marissa Thornton, she said, shaking Evelyn's hand. State-certified forensic auditor. Ms. Blake retained me to begin a financial review. We'll start with the joint account. Evelyn returned the handshake calm. Glad to meet you, Miss Thornton. Let's make it clean. Later that week, the family was gathered in Sandra's conference. The mood was not so much tense as brittle, like thin ice under too many footsteps. David sat next to Evelyn, his leg bouncing nervously beneath the table. Josh slouched 2 seats down, staring hard at the corner of his phone, earbuds dangling his collar but not in. Linda wasn't there. She'd declined to it. Busy, she'd said. Marissa stood at the front with a small projector screen behind her, flipping through spreadsheet slides like a prosecutor without needing a courtroom. The numbers were damning all on their own. We found a pattern of irregular withdrawals spanning 18 months, she began. Most are small, less than $100, but consistent. Some marked as gifts, some with no notation at all. Others appear to be PayPal transactions, Amazon orders, and boutique clothing purchases, all linked to digital accounts not belonging to Mrs. Harper. She paused. We traced most of them to one person, Linda Harper. David shifted in his seat, clearly wanting to speak, but unsure of the words. He glanced at Evelyn, then away again. Sandra interjected calmly. Linda was listed as a joint user on several accounts, correct? Evelyn nodded. I added her years ago, when David was traveling. She said it would help manage groceries and utilities. She used it for handbags and luxury skincare, Marissa added dryly. David cleared his throat. Maybe Linda didn't realize she was overspending. Maybe it wasn't malicious. Josh looked up suddenly. Dad. David stopped. Josh's voice was quiet but firm. She knew what she was doing. There was a long... Marissa flipped to the PD. Josh's voice was quiet but firm. She knew what she was doing. There was a long silence. Marissa flipped to the final slide. In total, we estimate $42,000 in unapproved personal spending, possibly more depending on how some overlapping charges are categorized. Evelyn sat motionless. Sandra looked toward David, but her tone held no judgment, only fact. That money was not hers to spend, and your mother didn't report the transaction because she was still trying to protect the family. That ends today. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice low but razor sharp. We'll let the audit finish her. Sandra gave a small approving nod. That's all we need for now. I'll begin drafting the civil complaint. David rose slowly, as if the act of standing carried shame with it. He didn't make excuses. He didn't look Evelyn in the eye. He simply said, I'll talk to her. Evelyn didn't stop him, but she didn't acknowledge the statement either. Josh remained behind after the others filtered out. He lingered by the door, backpack slung over one shoulder, avoiding her gaze. I didn't know, he mumbled, about the money, about all of this. I believe you, Evelyn said quietly, but believing you doesn't mean I forget what you repeated to me at the table. Josh nodded once, guilt heavy on his young face. Then he left. Mark Ellis had just stepped out of his office when one of the junior tellers flagged him down at the far end of the bank. Mr. Ellis? She said, voice pitched low. You might want to take this one. She nodded discreetly toward window 3. Linda Harper stood at the counter, a manila envelope clutched in one hand, and her designer sunglasses still perched on her head like a crown. Her smile was brittle, the kind of rehearsed pleasantry that frayed under pressure. The teller, a recent hire, barely out of college, looked rattled. She says she has authorization to access Mrs. Evelyn Harper's safe deposit box. The teller whispered, but her name's not listed. Mark didn't bother asking for detail. He stepped in immediately. Good morning, Ms. Harper, he said smoothly. What can we help you with today? Linda's face shifted from charm to indignation in the space of a heartbeat. I already explained to your colleague. I have this note. She held up the envelope, removing a folded sheet of paper. It authorizes me to access my mother-in-law's safe deposit box on her behalf. Mark took the paper without touching her finger. One glance was enough. The font was slightly off, the wording too vague. The signature, not Evelyn, not even close. This isn't valid, he said calmly, and it appears to be forged. Linda blinked, her mouth tightening. Excuse me? I'm going to have to retain this copy, Mark continued, folding it neatly. And for legal reasons, I'll be notifying Mrs. Harper directly. I think you're making a mistake, Linda said, her voice rising. She asked me to come. She forgot to give me full access. And now she's embarrassed. I'm trying to help her. She's not embarrassed, Mark said. And she doesn't need help from someone no longer legally tied to her accounts. He stepped back. Please leave, Ms. Harper. Linda opened her mouth, then shut it again. She turned, heels clicking on marble, and exited through the automatic doors without looking back. The phone on Evelyn's kitchen wall rang just after noon. She answered it on the third ring, already knowing who it would be. She tried to access the box, Mark said, presented a forged note. Evelyn exhaled, not surprised, just disappointed. Did you keep the paper? I did. It's already scanned, and I've locked the box until further notice. No one gets in or out but good. Evelyn hung up and walked to her study. On the desk, her cell phone buzzed 3 times in quick succession. Linda Harper. You really think you're going to win this? Linda Harper. I was trying to help you. Linda Harper. You're unbelievable. You've always been like that. Evelyn stared at the screen, unmoved. She opened her camera and took a photo of the message, timestamp. Then she saved the screenshots to a folder labeled Documentation, Legal. The phone buzzed again. Linda Harper. You're just an old woman playing queen of a crumbling castle. Evelyn let the screen go dark. Martha Klein arrived a half hour later with a bag of groceries and a pie she insisted was homemade, though Evelyn could still see the store label under the wax paper. She tried to get into the box? Martha asked, setting the items on the counter. Evelyn nodded. With a fake note and a lot of nerve, Martha let out a sharp whistle. She's not unraveling, she's detonating. She's clawing because she's cornered, Evelyn said quietly. There was a pause as the two women looked at each other. The pie sat forgotten between them. Evelyn picked up her cup of tea, a slow sip, letting the steam roll past her. Then she smiled, just barely. Good. The courtroom felt different, colder somehow. Despite the same paneled walls, the same rows of polished benches, the same seal of the state of Wisconsin hanging above Judge Rhonda Simmons' bench. But the air had changed, not in temperature, but in tone. Something sharper had entered the space. Scrutiny. Evelyn Harper sat at the respondent's, her hands folded neatly on the table and one thumb rhythmically tracing the hem of her silk blouse. She wore a slate gray suit and a quiet dignity that didn't ask for respect. It demanded it. Sandra sat beside her, flipping slowly through the day's hearing. Across the aisle, Linda looked tight. Her usual bluster had shrunk, compacted into sharper angle, tighter hair, stiffer blazer, and a stack of papers clutched in fingers that wouldn't stop twitching. Her attorney, the same one from the guardianship, whispered something to her that she didn't seem to hear. All rise, the bailiff announced. Judge Simmons entered, robed and unreadable, and took her seat with the kind of stillness that made you nervous even if you hadn't done anything wrong. This hearing is a continuation of the guardianship petition, specifically addressing recent filings regarding changes made to Mrs. Harper's trust structure and estate plan, she said. Sandra stood. Your Honor, the trust is already recorded and valid under Wisconsin statute. The petition brought forward by Ms. Harper's daughter-in-law alleges undue influence, which is unsubstantiated and insulting. Linda's attorney rose with an affected sigh. Your Honor, we're not accusing Mrs. Harper of incompetence. Clearly, the previous evaluation addressed that. We're arguing that she was pressured, that she was manipulated into excluding her family, specifically my client, who had a long-established relationship of care and trust with her mother-in-law until recent. Evelyn blinked once. Care and trust. As if the audit hadn't happened. Judge Simmons turned to Sandra. Do you have a response? Sandra reached into the folder and held up a stapled set of documents. A reaffirmed affidavit from Dr. Renee Tully, the licensed psychologist who evaluated Mrs. Harper. It confirms not only full mental competence, but specific cognitive clarity during the period in which the trust was revised. Additionally, we are prepared to recall Mr. Mark Ellis of Central Trust to clarify that all instructions were initiated and completed solely by Mrs. Harper. Mark was already seated at the back of the courtroom. He stood and approached the stand with the steady ease of someone who had nothing to hide. After being sworn in, he spoke without hesitation. Mrs. Harper came to my office alone, requested a full review of her estate planning, and signed all documentation of her own volition. She had questions, sharp one. I've worked in financial services for 30 years. No one was manipulating. Linda looked toward him with narrowed eyes, as though willing him to trip over his own words. He didn't. Her attorney tried to salvage. Is it possible she felt pressured to remove my client from her accounts due to family tension? Mark shrugged lightly. I'm not a psychologist, sir. But from where I sat, Mrs. Harper looked like someone to control, not ceding it. The judge took off her glasses and set them on the bench. I'm not hearing evidence of coercion. I'm hearing clean document, professional testimony, and a valid trust. Unless you have something substantial, we'll be moving on. Linda's lawyer sat down, defeated. She turned toward him in disbelief, then back toward the judge, her voice barely audible. So that's it? No, Ms. Harper, Judge Simmons said. It means your motion to contest the trust is denied. Evelyn didn't move, didn't smile. She just stayed still, solid, grounded, like the house Linda could never bulldoze. As court adjourned, Sandra leaned in, voice low, words crisp as a scalpel. Next, she said, comes the audit. Evelyn allowed herself one slow blink. The courtroom was smaller less ceremonial. A narrow hearing room on the third floor of the Milwaukee County Courthouse, used for evidentiary proceedings and preliminary motion. No oak panels here, just drywall painted an institutional beige, with a few mismatched chairs lining the back wall. But Evelyn knew better than to judge a room by its trim. Real damage, she had learned, didn't need a grand setting. Judge Simmons presided again, flanked by two clerks and a paralegal. Sandra Blake stood poised at the front, a file folder open in front of her like a scalpel on a surgical tray. Next to her, Marissa Thornton, the forensic auditor, adjusted her glasses and waited for her cue. Evelyn sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap. Behind her, David and Josh flanked Linda, who, for the first time in weeks, looked less like a woman on the offensive and more like someone trapped in her own avalanche. Judge Simmons glanced at the docket. This is a continuation of the Harper probate matter. Counsel, proceed. Sandra stepped forward. Your Honor, we are submitting the findings of a certified forensic audit conducted by Ms. Marissa Thornton, retained to review joint bank accounts belonging to Mrs. Evelyn Harper. Simmons nodded. Go ahead. Marissa stood, professional and neutral. Over the course of the last 18 months, there have been consistent withdrawals and transfers from Mrs. Harper's accounts totaling $42,317. These transactions were conducted online and in person, many flagged as uncharacteristic spending based on the account holder's financial. She clicked a small remote. A flat-screen monitor behind her displayed a slide, a table of dates, amounts, and retail. Amazon, Nordstrom, PayPal, Sephora. These transactions were traced to user accounts registered under Linda Harper's name and email address. Some of the shipping addresses matched her home, and others were rerouted to a P.O. box also registered under her maiden name. We have verified these links through digital receipts, credit card tokens, and browser metadata. Judge Simmons didn't flinch. And Mrs. Harper was unaware of these withdrawals? She was unaware until she noticed discrepancies in her monthly statement. She has since revoked all joint access and filed a complaint through counsel. David had gone pale, his mouth parted slightly, as if words were forming, but none arrived. Beside him, Linda stared at the monitor like she didn't recognize her own. Josh slowly leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was staring at the floor, jaw set, face flushed. Sandra took the floor again. Your Honor, this pattern of spending, concealed over a year and a half, falls under the statutory definition of elder financial exploitation in the state of Wisconsin. She turned, deliberately, to face Linda, especially when committed by someone in a position of trust. Judge Simmons looked down at her notes, then up again, her voice not angry, just resolute. Ms. Harper, she said to Linda, I am obligated to report these findings to the district attorney's office for review. A potential referral for criminal charges will be considered under Wisconsin Statute 46. Linda blinked once, but I didn't. The judge cut her off. I suggest you speak with your own attorney before responding further. David finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Linda, tell me this isn't true. Linda looked at him as if she didn't understand the question. Then, slowly, she turned toward Evelyn. She's doing this to punish me, she hissed. This whole circus. Sandra stepped forward sharply. Careful. But Evelyn didn't react. She didn't move. Her expression was unreadable. It wasn't cold. It was still. Like the surface of a lake that hides how deep it truly runs. She exhaled, slow and silent. The morning paper arrived late. Evelyn noticed it the moment she stepped onto her front porch. Normally folded with quiet precision, it now sat slightly askew, the pages rumpled as if someone had already read it and put it back. She stooped to retrieve it, joints stiff in the early chill. Autumn had finally arrived in Milwaukee. The air carried the brittle edge of leaves about to fall. She didn't have to flip far. Local widow outsmarts exploitative daughter-in-law. The headline ran across the top of the Metro section in bold black letters. Below it, a grainy courthouse photo showed Evelyn stepping out into the sunlight, Sandra Blake beside her, briefcase in hand. A smaller inset photo showed Linda mid-step, mouth open, caught mid-blink, unflattering, unguarded, unmistakable. Evelyn stood still for a long moment on her porch, paper in hand. Then she turned and went inside. By mid-morning, the doorbell had rung twice. The first time, it was her neighbor, Louise Callahan, holding a Tupperware container full of lemon bars. I just read the article, Louise said, her voice lowering even though they stood alone. I'm so sorry you went through all that. I had no idea. Evelyn accepted the lemon bars with a small, polite smile. Thank you, Louise. That's kind of you. The second ring came from the Ryans across the street, Tom with his cap in hand and his wife, Gwen, practically vibrating with sympathy. We support you, Gwen said firmly. If you ever need anything at all. Evelyn thanked them too, without inviting them in. She wasn't ready for coffee and consolation, not yet. She placed the paper on the kitchen table beside her journal and sat down. For a long time, she just stared at the headline. She hadn't asked for the coverage. Sandra had warned her it might leak once the criminal referral went public. Still, it felt surreal. Her quiet war, her deliberate moves made behind teacups and legal pads, had become neighborhood conversation. By the time noon arrived, Evelyn had received 5 emails from old colleagues, 3 texts from church acquaintances, and a single voicemail from a woman she hadn't spoken to since retirement, and not a word from Sandra. Called around 2:30. "They're running the story online now, too," she said. "It's got traction." "I gathered," Evelyn said dryly. "She'll be humiliated," Sandra added. "Might even back off the civil side just to avoid further exposure. But we're still filing for restitution." "Of course," Evelyn replied. "She doesn't get to disappear from this." Sandra paused. "Want to guess who else called me this morning?" Evelyn waited. "David." "What did he say?" Sandra exhaled. "He said he was sorry. For being passive, for not seeing it, for not stepping in sooner." Evelyn was silent for a beat. Then, "He always said sorry. Even when he was little. He never liked conflict. He thought apologies were enough to erase damage." "Are they?" Sandra asked. "No," Evelyn said gently, "but I don't need revenge. I needed proof, and now I have it." Josh didn't come by that week. No texts, no calls, just a quiet absence that felt heavier than any apology might have. Martha came by on Friday with fresh coffee and a stack of circulars from the hardware store. She dropped them on the kitchen counter like offerings. "You're famous now," she said. "Internet's calling you a local legend." Evelyn chuckled. "I suppose there are worse headlines." Martha poured coffee. "Linda's finished. She's wounded," Evelyn corrected. "Finished will come later." They drank in silence for a while until Martha spoke again. "I saw the way people looked at you at the store. It's shifted. It's not pity anymore." Evelyn set down her mug. Her voice was soft, almost to herself. "Respect is louder than cruelty. It just takes longer to hear." The formal charges came on a Wednesday. A plain white envelope arrived in Sandra Blake's office bearing the seal of the Milwaukee County District Attorney. Inside were 2 typed pages detailing the results of the investigation, felony charges for financial exploitation of an elder adult, and a secondary charge for fraud under false pretenses. Sandra didn't call right away. She drove to Evelyn's house instead, parking behind the row of hedges and stepping up to the porch with the envelope in hand. Evelyn opened the door before she could knock. "I saw you pull in," she said, stepping aside. "Come in." They sat in the living room, sunlight streaking through the window blinds and casting long, angled shadows across the rug. Sandra handed her the envelope, and Evelyn opened it without ceremony, her eyes scanning the clean black lines like someone checking off a grocery list. When she looked up, her face gave nothing away. "They're not holding back," Sandra said. "These are real charges." She could face up to 10 years if convicted. Evelyn didn't speak at first. Then, "Do you think David knew?" "No," Sandra replied, "but he knows now. And that's going to hurt worse." David came over the following evening. No warning, just knocked on the door around 6, wearing an old brewer's sweatshirt and holding a half-empty cup of gas station coffee. Evelyn didn't ask him in. She stepped out onto the porch instead, cardigan pulled tight around her. "She's been crying all day," he said, voice hoarse. "She's saying I abandoned her, that I picked you over her." Evelyn watched him closely. "Did you?" David hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe. I didn't stop her. I let it go on because it was easier, because I didn't want to see it for what it was." Evelyn nodded once. "That's your burden now, not mine." "I'm sorry," he said again. She didn't say she forgave him, but she didn't tell him to leave either. Later that night, Martha came by with a bottle of Merlot and a bag of microwave popcorn. "I saw it on the news," she said, handing off the wine. "They're saying the DA is pushing for restitution in full. Plus sanctions." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Sanctions?" "Court order to restrict her from managing anyone's finances for the next 10 years, even her own son's." Sandra's filing that, along with the civil suit. Evelyn poured them both a glass and sat in the sunroom, the house quiet around them. Martha took a sip. "It's not revenge, you know." "I know. It's repair. Of a story they thought they could rewrite without you." Evelyn gave a small, tired smile. "They thought I'd stay silent because I was old." "You're not old," Martha replied. "You're just older than their attention span." 2 days later, Evelyn opened the mailbox to find a single, neatly folded envelope addressed in Josh's handwriting. She recognized it immediately. The tall, slanted letters, the careful spacing. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Dear Grandma, I'm sorry for what I said, for what I didn't say, for not seeing what was happening. I should have asked more questions. I should have asked you. I know it doesn't undo anything, but I'm trying. I'm listening. I'm learning. And I hope someday you'll let me earn back your trust. Love." Josh. Evelyn folded the letter slowly, hands steady. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. Instead, she stood, walked to the study, and placed the letter in the same folder that once held every legal document in this long, unraveling battle. He wasn't absolved, but he had begun. The legal pad on Evelyn's kitchen table had become a second heartbeat, always present, always humming in the background. Each page bore names, dates, phrases she'd practiced aloud in the stillness of her house, not because she didn't know what had happened, but because when the time came, she wanted every word to land exactly where it needed to. "I don't want to sound angry," she told Sandra one afternoon. "I want to sound clear." Sandra nodded. "Anger won't help. Clarity will." The final hearing was just days away. Not probate, not civil pretrial, criminal court, formal, public, real consequences. Sandra was methodical, assembling her witness list with the same precision Evelyn once used to arrange first-grade reading circles. Mark Ellis had already agreed to testify. Dr. Tully, too, confirming again Evelyn's full cognitive capacity. Even Martha, who had once claimed she'd rather eat nails than speak under oath, had signed the subpoena without protest. "I'm not doing it for you," Martha had teased. "I'm doing it because I hate watching grown women act like snakes in heels." They both knew better. She was doing it for Evelyn. Evelyn practiced her testimony at Sandra's office, seated at a plain wooden table that somehow felt more intimidating than the courtroom benches. "Let's try that question again," Sandra said gently. "When did you first notice inconsistencies in your joint accounts?" Evelyn folded her hands. "About 18 months ago. The balances started falling faster than they should have. I noticed charges I didn't recognize. Boutique brands, tech subscription, high-end skincare. I knew it wasn't me." Sandra made a note. "Good. Calm. Stay like that." "I'm not worried about the words," Evelyn said. "It's the eyes I'll be looking into." "Then don't look at her," Sandra replied. "Look at the judge. Look at me. Look at the truth Judge Rhonda Simmons would be presiding." Evelyn had read every article she could find about her education, her reputation for fairness, her reluctance to entertain theatrics in the courtroom. "She doesn't tolerate deflection," Sandra had said, "and she's never once thrown out a financial exploitation charge that came with documentation." That gave Evelyn comfort. Not because she expected Simmons to favor her, but because she trusted her not to look away. On Friday evening, the doorbell rang just before sunset. Evelyn opened it to find Josh standing there, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes rimmed red, not from crying, but from what came after. "I can't stay long," he said. "Dad's waiting in the car." She stepped aside anyway. "Come in." He looked around the front room as if it had changed since the last time he saw it. It hadn't, only he had. He cleared his throat. "I wrote you, but I wanted to say it too." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded note card. "I don't expect you to forgive me all at once, but I want you to know, I get it now. I saw it. I watched her lie. I watched her try to burn everything down and act like she was the victim." Evelyn took the card, set it aside without looking at it. Then Josh took a half step forward and wrapped his arms around her, sudden and clumsy and entirely real. "I'm sorry, Grandma," he whispered. She didn't cry. She didn't hold him for long, but she did press her hand gently to the back of his neck and say, "Be better than her." He nodded against her shoulder. The courtroom was full by 9 a.m., not packed, but attended. Reporters in the back row, notebooks ready. A smattering of neighbors and curious retirees on the left side, and toward the front, Evelyn Harper seated between Sandra Blake and Martha Klein, hands folded neatly in her lap. The air had that static pressure found only in rooms where truths were about to be made irreversible. Linda sat across the aisle, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched. Her blazer looked expensive, but the illusion of control it once gave her had long since worn thin. David sat behind her, shoulders collapsed inward like scaffolding giving way. Josh hadn't come. Judge Simmons entered promptly at 9:06. The bailiff called for order, and the room settled. This is case number 4814-CF, State of Wisconsin versus Linda Harper. Continuation for final ruling. Miss Blake, proceed. Sandra stood, calm as ever. Your Honor, with the court's permission, we'd like to begin by playing footage provided by Central Trust Bank. The video has been time-stamped, authenticated, and entered into evidence. Simmons nodded. The screen flickered to life, and the grainy black and white security feed appeared. A familiar marble floor, a teller window, and there, Linda Harper in designer sunglasses, leaning across the counter with a forged note in hand. The room watched in silence as Mark Ellis entered the frame, as Linda's mouth moved in tight, clipped syllables. As he took the paper, read it, and said something they couldn't hear. As Linda's face twisted, just slightly, and then turned, walking out of frame like a storm cloud rolling past the camera. When the video ended, Sandra approached the bench with a printout in hand. Your Honor, this forged authorization, presented in person and caught on surveillance, is a direct attempt to access a restricted asset belonging solely to Mrs. Harper. She placed it on the evidence table. In addition, the audit trail, which Your Honor has already reviewed in pre-trial, confirms a pattern of covert withdrawals from joint accounts, totaling over $42,000, all traceable to digital identifiers under the defendant's name. There was no rebuttal. Linda's attorney remained seated, a legal pad in front of him but no pen in hand. They both knew there was nothing left to argue. Judge Simmons adjusted her glasses, looked over the documents again, then removed them from the stack with care, one page at a time, methodical and final. The court finds the defendant, Linda Harper, guilty on both counts: financial exploitation of an elder adult and fraud under false pretenses. A small gasp escaped someone in the back. Simmons continued, unshaken. Sentencing recommendations will follow, but this court orders immediate restitution in full to Mrs. Evelyn Harper in the amount of $42,317.14. Additionally, the defendant is barred from managing or holding fiduciary authority over any family accounts, trusts, or financial instruments for a period no less than 10 years. Linda's face cracked, just for a moment. Not tears, not defiance. Something hollower, like a mask that had forgotten what face it was trying to imitate. Behind her, David made a choked sound, half a breath, half a sob, and covered his face with one hand. The other reached instinctively toward her, then stopped, hovering uselessly in the space between them. Evelyn didn't flinch, didn't blink. Martha, seated beside her, reached over and gently took her hand, their fingers laced, quiet and strong. Judge Simmons banged the gavel once. Court is adjourned. Evelyn didn't move. She just sat there for a few seconds longer, letting the noise swirl around her, the rustling papers, the footsteps, the whispered shock. And then she exhaled. Not a sigh, not relief, something deeper, like a tether that had finally gone slack. As they stood, Sandra placed a hand on Evelyn's back and leaned in. You're free of her now. Evelyn gave a faint nod. I know. David approached hesitantly, eyes rimmed red. He opened his mouth, but Evelyn stopped him with a small, restrained gesture, two fingers held gently up. Not now, she said without anger. You'll have your moment. But this one is mine. He bowed his head. Martha helped her gather her things. Sandra held the door. As they stepped out into the sharp, clean Wisconsin air, Evelyn paused on the courthouse steps. She looked up, not at the cameras, not at the people whispering her name, but at the sky, steel gray, quiet, unapologetic, like her. The wind was gentler now. It sifted through the lace curtains Evelyn had just washed that morning, stirring the scent of fresh lavender and dish soap through the kitchen. Outside, the sky was clear, not soft, not brooding, just present. It felt honest. That was enough. Martha stood by the sink, rinsing the last of the teacups. You want help in the yard? Or is this one of your spiritual solitude moments? Evelyn looked up from the kitchen table where a pair of gardening gloves sat next to her reading glasses. You're welcome to help, so long as you don't touch the lilies. I still haven't forgiven you for last spring. Martha rolled her eyes but grinned. That was one time, and they came back fine. They came back defensive, Evelyn said. like they'd been through something. They stepped outside together, the screen door slapping gently shut behind them. The flower beds along the side of the house had already been tilled and edged. Evelyn knelt by the soil, trowel in hand, while Martha set about untangling the garden hose. There was no rush. That was the gift. No surveillance, no shadows, no signature lines hidden in fine print. Just dirt, sunlight, and her hands in both. An hour passed, then two. They moved in rhythm, comfortable and quiet. Martha hummed off-key to some forgotten 70s tune, while Evelyn planted violets and dahlias in a shallow crescent beneath the living room window. It was just after 3 when the sound of tires on gravel caught their attention. Josh stepped out of the car before it came to a full stop. He didn't walk quickly. He didn't wave. But he didn't hesitate either. Evelyn dusted off her gloves and stood, wiping a hand across her forehead. "Hey," he said, eyes on the flower bed. "Looks good." "I told you last spring they needed room," Evelyn replied. "They're finally getting it." Josh nodded, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets. "Can I help?" She gestured to the trowel. "There's room by the porch for the marigolds." He dropped to his knees beside her, digging slowly, carefully. For a while, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. When the final plant was in, Josh sat back on his heels and looked up at her. "I still think about what I said that morning at the table. I wish I could go back and unsay it." Evelyn didn't respond right away. She walked to the hose, twisted the nozzle, and let the stream run soft over the new soil. Only when the last flower bed had been watered did she return to where he sat. "You were repeating what you heard," she said. "But the damage was your own." Josh looked down, nodding. "But," she continued, "you came back. That's yours too." He exhaled, quiet relief passing through his shoulders. "Are we okay?" Evelyn bent down and pulled off her gloves. "We're not broken," she said gently. "We're mending." "That's harder." But it's honest. Josh stood and helped her gather the tools. When he reached for the heavy bag of soil, she let him take it without protest. Inside, the house smelled of lemon oil and fresh paper. A single envelope sat on the entry table. One final delivery from Sandra, trust confirmed, estate secure, all documents filed. Evelyn set it beneath the small ceramic bowl that held her spare keys and a single, folded recipe for buttermilk pie. Later, as dusk fell over the house, Evelyn stood at the threshold of the living room, looking at the space that had once held so much unsaid. Martha watched her from the armchair. "Feels different, doesn't it?" "Yes," Evelyn said, "but not new. Just mine again." She moved to the window and looked out at the flower beds, the porch, the mailbox. "This is my house," she said softly. "My choice. All of it." She turned off the lights, one switch at a time, until only the hallway lamp remained. Outside, the wind had gone quiet. The lights weren't harsh, but they were plenty. Soft stage cans framed the conference podium in amber, catching the silver at Evelyn Harper's temples and the calm, composed lines of her gray linen jacket. She stood centered beneath the overhead spotlight, a single sheet of paper in her hands. She didn't read from it. She didn't need to. Rows of chairs stretched before her. Community advocates, legal professionals, state officials, a few curious students from the back rows. They'd come for a panel on financial abuse prevention. They stayed because Evelyn Harper had something to say. "My name is Evelyn," she began, voice smooth and low. "I am not a lawyer. I am not a victim advocate. I was a teacher, a mother, a wife, and until 18 months ago, I thought being careful was the same thing as being safe." The room quieted even more. "My daughter-in-law accessed my accounts without my permission. She used my trust, my real, emotional trust, as a weapon. She smiled in my kitchen while siphoning away money I earned over a lifetime. And she nearly succeeded in having me declared legally incompetent." There was no tremor in her voice, just steel, pressed into silk. "I did what women of my generation were taught to do. I tried to solve it quietly. I made folders. I collected receipts. I told myself it was a misunderstanding." She let the silence stretch before continuing. "It wasn't." A few audience members shifted. One took a slow breath like they hadn't realized they'd been holding it. "Eventually, I called a lawyer, and then a doctor, and then a forensic auditor. And then I stood in a courtroom and watched the people who loved me decide which version of me was easier to believe, the strong one, or the one they didn't have to fight for." Her voice didn't rise, but the room leaned forward, pulled by the gravity in her restraint. There were losses, trust, time, my son, my grandson, for a while. But I gained something too. I gained clarity. And I kept my home. She stepped slightly to the side of the podium, lifting the paper in her hand just once. This isn't a speech about revenge. This is a story about refusal. Refusal to be erased. Refusal to be underestimated. She turned her gaze to the back of the room, where Josh sat quietly, hair a little longer now, suit a little too big. His hands were folded in his lap, but he met her eyes when she looked. And if you're here today, wondering how to begin, you already have. The moment you ask the question, you are not powerless, you're awake. She paused. Not for drama, for meaning. I wasn't waiting, she said finally. I was writing. Then she stepped back. The applause didn't crash like thunder. It rose like dawn. A wave of human agreement, of shared reckoning, rolling forward until nearly everyone was on their feet. Martha, seated in the second row, leaned forward with tears caught on her lashes. From insult to impact, she whispered to no one in particular. Josh stood slowly in the back, clapping, not for attention, not for show, just for her. Evelyn didn't bow. She didn't wave. She walked off the stage the same way she had walked into court, and into Sandra's office, and into the bank, steady, unbroken. Sandra was waiting just off stage with a soft smile and a proud nod. Behind her, a man from the Community Coalition held out a signed thank you card and a plaque that would eventually go in Evelyn's study, maybe near the window. But Evelyn paused at the curtain, glancing back once at the podium